I went to dinner with my family at the restaurant and saw my wife and her lover together at the next table. They were laughing. Laughing. She was playing with her hair like she used to do with me at the beginning. He was touching her hand as if he had been close to her for a lifetime. My children were by my side. My parents. The table was full of people I loved and who I would never have imagined seeing my life fall apart in real time, under candlelight and silverware crashing against porcelain plates. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Someone similar. A ridiculous misunderstanding that would be resolved in the blink of an eye. But then she saw me. She froze. And that was the exact moment when everything stopped being confusing and became the harsh truth. It wasn't a mistake. It was real. It was my nightmare sitting less than 2 meters away from me, chewing, smiling, betraying. And that was when I felt my chest tighten in a way that not even the air wanted to get in anymore. Each of their laughs cut me like glass. My mouth was dry, my heart pounding in my stomach. But I didn't get up right away. Out of pride? Out of shock? I don't know. But when I stood up, I felt the whole restaurant stop to watch. I got closer. My family's eyes followed my every step as if they knew, as if they already understood what was happening before I did. And there, with a firm voice, but with a broken soul, I said, I hope you can explain this situation well. My whole family came here for dinner and they're seeing the same scene as me. She didn't answer. Not a word. Her silence spoke louder than any scream. And that's when I understood that there was no justification. That all of that was just a continuation of something I never knew existed. And then I turned my back, swallowed each tear as if it were stones and said, okay then, I'll send the divorce letter to your house. But the wound didn't heal there. That was just the beginning. What came next was even more unexpected. Because in the months that followed, she lost everything she claimed to value. Her lover abandoned her. Without warning, without explanation. He simply disappeared like dust in the wind. And then she came after me. Perhaps hoping to find the man who had been destroyed by her. Perhaps hoping for the same passionate look that had once made her feel loved beyond any doubt. But I was already in another life. In another time. In another story. A story where pain had left a scar, yes, but also a freedom I never thought I would feel. She came to me crying. Saying she made a mistake. That she realized too late that what we had was rare. That he was nothing more than an illusion that only existed while there was a ban. That without the contrast of my presence, he was just emptiness. She told me that she slept and woke up waiting for a message from me. That the days had lost their shine. That the food had no taste, that the bed was cold, that the silence of the house echoed like a punishment. And there, in front of me, she begged for something that I could no longer give. Because something inside me had died the day I saw her with him. And when something dies, it never comes back. The cruelest thing about betrayal is not the act itself, it is what it kills. It kills the trust that took years to build. It kills the look that was once a refuge. It kills the plans that, even if unspoken, existed in silence. And there, looking into her eyes, I realized that love can indeed turn to dust. That not every feeling survives the deep cut of disappointment. And I left. Without anger, without harsh words. I just left. Because sometimes silence is the loudest scream someone can give. But the most curious thing wasn't that. The most curious thing is what came after. Because, even though I had moved on, even though I had rebuilt my life, I never knew the real reason she had done that. Not really. Until that day. The day an envelope arrived with a letter I hadn't seen in a long time. Inside, there was no apology. There was something else. Something that completely changed everything I thought I knew about our story. Something that made me question whether, in the end, I really knew the woman I had shared so many years with. And that's when everything changes. Because sometimes the greatest betrayal is not the one that hurts, but the one that reveals. And what that envelope revealed, was something that not even I was prepared to discover. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and will never support any type of betrayal. All the stories told are fictional, but based on situations deeply real, showing how betrayal can tear families, hearts and futures apart. Our goal is clear: reveal the consequences, the pain and the profound impact that infidelity has on the lives of those who trust. Get ready now for a shocking story, intense and unforgettable. Happy listening. Jonathan was always a reserved man, but with a quiet intensity that few knew how to recognize. He wasn't the type to impose himself with loud words or big gestures, but with consistency. He worked as a project coordinator at a civil engineering company and, although it wasn't a position that drew attention at family parties or on social media, it was the type of job that required firmness, responsibility, and a long-term vision, characteristics that he also carried in his personal life. He married Emily at the age of 29, after 5 years of dating that began while he was still in college. Emily, at the time, was studying psychology and, right away, everyone noticed how easily she connected with people. He was sweet, sensitive, and had a gentle way of listening to others and showing empathy, a fascinating contrast to Jonathan's more pragmatic and direct way. What seemed like an imbalance, in fact, always worked as a balance between them. They built a life together in a quiet, upper-middle-class neighborhood, a single-story house with a well-kept front garden, with pots of hydrangeas and lavender that Emily proudly cultivated. The house was modest, but full of details that revealed years of living together, photographs of trips to Tuscany and the interior of Chile, small souvenirs from each place they visited. Everything reflected a mutual effort to build not just a residence, but a home. They had 2 children, Lucas, now 10 years old, an observant, reserved boy who took after his father, and Sophia, 7, outgoing and talkative, full of energy and curiosity, very much like her mother. On weekends, it was common to see the family gathered in the backyard for an informal barbecue, children running around, laughing, neighbors stopping by to say hello. To those who looked from the outside, it seemed like a solid, structured and happy family. And in many ways, it was. Jonathan was not a romantic man in the classic sense of the word. He didn't bring flowers for no reason, nor did he make crazy surprises, but his way of loving was in his daily life, in remembering the medicine Emily needed to take, in adjusting the heater before she woke up on cold days, in picking up the children from school on days when she said she was tired. Emily, on the other hand, was more emotional, more connected to gestures and words. She liked loving notes, being surprised, hearing, "I love you," even if she already knew it. Jonathan wasn't indifferent to this, he just showed it in a different way, believing that true love is based more on actions than on declarations. And this, for a long time, worked. But, over the years, some subtle differences began to emerge. Small gaps that, even discreet, left their mark. Emily began to feel a lack of something that she herself could not name. It was not unhappiness, nor was it direct dissatisfaction. It was an internal restlessness, as if, even though everything was fine, something was out of place. She began to invest more time in herself, resumed old hobbies, and started painting again, something she had done as a teenager. She enrolled in a body language course and began attending reading groups and cultural gatherings. Jonathan, despite respecting her space, felt a little out of place in this new phase of his wife's life. He was not resistant to change, but he was someone who needed logic and planning. And Emily's new phase seemed to be driven by impulses, momentary desires, and wishes that did not fit into the usual script of the life they had built. The nights became quieter. The dialogue between the two still existed, but it revolved around routine, children, bills, commitments. The touching, the kisses, the moments of intimacy became less frequent. Jonathan noticed, yes. But instead of confronting, he sought to compensate with more presence, believing that if he showed himself to be even more trustworthy, things would return to normal. Emily, in turn, felt increasingly invisible in the relationship, as if his affection were automatic. She still loved him, but this love seemed to be parked on a road they were already too familiar with. She didn't blame him, but she also didn't know how to rekindle something that she herself no longer understood. Among their friends, the couple was admired. They were seen as solid partners, with well-behaved children and a life that many considered ideal. They went to dinners, birthdays, and school reunions together, always holding hands, as if everything was in perfect order. Jonathan, despite his more introspective nature, was charismatic in social interactions, knew how to converse well, was polite and helpful. Emily was the spark of the couple, the one who brought lightness, who made others laugh, who knew how to tell stories like no one else. It was impossible to suspect that there, behind well-choreographed smiles, there was a silent abyss growing between two worlds that previously seemed indivisible. On Saturday mornings, Jonathan maintained the habit of bringing Emily coffee in bed. A gesture that began in their first year of marriage and, even on the busiest days, he made sure to maintain. She thanked him with a gentle smile, but her eyes no longer sparkled in the same way. It was as if each gesture was acknowledged but not absorbed. As if there was an invisible layer separating the present from the past. Jonathan began to see this not as a mistake on her part, but as an inevitable change in the times. He never imagined himself married to another woman, never considered the idea that his marriage could go into crisis. After all, everything he did was for her, for the children, for the house. But love, he would discover, is not fueled by good intentions alone. One night, during a random dinner, without any special date, without any major preparations, Emily looked at him for several seconds. It was a dense look, full of something that could not be translated into words. Jonathan tried to decipher it, but said nothing. He was tired, the day at work had been tense and the children were more agitated than usual. They finished dinner in silence. That night, she fell asleep facing the other side of the bed. And, for the first time in many years, he felt a strange cold in his chest. As if something was moving away beyond his reach. In the days that followed, nothing unusual happened. There were no fights or arguments. The routine went on. School, work, supermarket, small family celebrations. But there was something in the air. An unspoken absence. Emily spent more time on her cell phone, sometimes smiling to herself, other times just staring at the screen, motionless. Jonathan watched, but didn't question. Not out of fear, but because he believed that if she needed to talk, she would. It had always been like that. What he didn't know is that, sometimes, silence is also an answer. An answer that can hide a universe of unasked questions. One Sunday morning, Jonathan went for a run in the park, as he always did. When he came back, he found Emily painting on the porch. The smell of acrylic paint, the soft sound of instrumental music, everything seemed harmonious. He approached her, complimented the painting, talked about the weather, about the run, about the children who were still sleeping. She smiled, but her eyes were far away. He wanted to ask what was wrong, but something stopped him. Maybe the fear of hearing a truth that he was not prepared to deal with. And at that moment, for the first time, he felt that something might be slipping through the cracks of that life that he thought was unshakable. Time passed. Their wedding anniversary was approaching. 17 years of living together. Jonathan planned a simple but meaningful surprise. He booked a restaurant they liked, invited his parents, siblings, and closest friends. He wanted to celebrate not only the date, but perhaps rekindle something he felt was fading. Emily agreed to the dinner, smiled at the idea, and even chose her dress with restrained enthusiasm. That day, as he got ready, Jonathan looked at her like he hadn't in a long time. She was beautiful. She was still, for him, the woman who made everything worthwhile. And, even though something was different, there was still hope in his heart. Hope that that dinner could be a point of new beginnings. He had no idea that that night would mark the end of everything he knew as life. And that, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. Dinner was scheduled for 8 o'clock, and Jonathan arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early. He wanted to make sure everything was right with the reservation, the table, and the little details that he missed in his daily life but now made all the difference. He asked for a bottle of white wine to be chilled, chose a table near the glass wall overlooking the illuminated fountain in the outdoor courtyard, and checked the flower arrangement he had discreetly requested from the maitre d'. The children had been left with Emily's sister, as agreed. It was a night that, for him, meant more than just a wedding anniversary. It was a silent attempt at reunion, a bridge built between two hearts that had not touched deeply for a long time. When Emily arrived, her beauty seemed magnified by the soft lighting of the room. She was wearing a dark blue dress he had not seen in a long time, her hair tied up with casual elegance, and a smile that, for a second, disarmed him. She sat across from him, nodded thank you for the wine, and asked if his parents had arrived yet. They were on their way, he replied, trying not to show the anxiety he felt inside. During the first few minutes, the conversation flowed with an almost forced naturalness. They talked about their children, about Lucas's new interests at school, about Sophia's last ballet class, about the crazy traffic, about the possibility of a family trip during the next vacation. Jonathan spoke with a smile on his face, but he felt that something remained stuck between them. Emily listened, participated, but there was a strange lightness in her gestures, as if she were floating above that night, as if she were no longer completely there. When the family arrived, the smiles grew, the toasts were made, the flashes of cell phones immortalized moments that, to everyone else, seemed perfect. Jonathan looked around and tried to absorb every detail, as if it were a photograph that he wanted to keep alive inside him. Emily smiled, posed for photos, made jokes with her sister, complimented his father-in-law's dish. And for a while, Jonathan almost believed that maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. Maybe his anguish was just the result of accumulated fatigue, of years of routine and challenges. Maybe there was still a chance. But then, in an instant as quick as a snap, everything changed. The table next to him was occupied by a couple who seemed to be on a romantic date. They were laughing discreetly, exchanging intense glances, and were absorbed in each other. Jonathan wouldn't have noticed anything special if it weren't for the woman's face facing him. His heart stopped for a second. It wasn't possible. Time seemed to slow down. His breath became shallow. He blinked several times, as if his brain refused to accept the image his eyes insisted on showing him. Emily. Sitting there. Holding hands with another man. But no. She was there, in front of him, smiling, toasting with her family. That woman at the other table was an exact copy of her, perhaps an absurd coincidence, a trick of the mind. Jonathan felt nausea rise in his throat, but he hid it. He looked again. This time more closely. And then he realized. The woman at the next table didn't look like her. It was Emily. The same bracelet he had given her on her last birthday. The same way she tossed her hair back. The same laugh he knew with his eyes closed. How? How could it be there and in front of him at the same time? The blood ran cold in his veins. He looked at the chair in front of him. Empty. Emily had gone to the bathroom a few minutes ago. And that was when Jonathan's world fell apart. She was with him that special night, but she was also with another man, in the same restaurant, at the next table. It was as if the universe was shouting in his face the truth he had so avoided seeing. The pieces were falling into place now, painfully. The recent separation, the absent glances, the rare touches, the laughter on the cell phone, the prolonged silences. It all made sense. She was torn between two lives. Two versions of herself. And he was no longer the protagonist of her story. Jonathan stood still for a few seconds. He tried to decide what to do. Scream. Cry. Run away. But then she came back. She sat down calmly, with her napkin in her hands, and smiled again. As if nothing was out of place. As if the ground beneath her feet was not about to collapse. He said nothing. Not at that moment. He just watched. And with every look, with every gesture of hers, the certainty of what she had seen was confirmed. Later, when his parents and siblings had said goodbye and the bill had been paid, Jonathan suggested they walk a little way to the car. The restaurant had an outdoor area with decorative rocks and illuminated trees, a beautiful and quiet space. They walked side by side, but not hand in hand. He was silent. Emily seemed calm, perhaps slightly distracted. When they reached the car, he stopped. He looked at her and asked with a serenity that did not match the earthquake inside his chest if she had enjoyed the evening. Emily said yes, that everything had been wonderful, that the food was great, that the children would love to see the photos. He nodded, and then, looking into her eyes, asked if there was anything she wanted to tell him. The silence that followed lasted no more than 5 seconds, but it was enough to confirm everything. She hesitated, lowered her eyes, tried to find a plausible explanation, but no words came out. It was then that he was certain that everything he had seen was real. It was not paranoia. It was not confusion. It was fact. Emily had cheated. And she knew he knew. That night, they slept under the same roof. There was no argument. There was no shouting. Just silence. Jonathan couldn't sleep a wink. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, reliving every detail of the night, of the table next to him, of the other man's face, of her smile. He tried to remember the exact moment she stopped loving him, but he couldn't find it. The next day, he woke up early. He made the children breakfast. He put on their uniforms. He took them to school. Emily acted as if nothing had happened. But her gaze carried the weight of someone who knew she had been discovered. Jonathan, however, decided not to confront her yet. Not out of cowardice, but because of something bigger. Something inside him demanded more. He wanted to understand. He wanted to know how far she was capable of going. He wanted to understand the origin of that abyss. In the days that followed, he observed everything with different eyes. Her schedules. Her excuses. Her clothes. Her empty smiles. Her small but significant absences. Emily was still a mother, still caring, still present. But she had become someone else. A divided woman. And he, a spectator of his own story. Until the moment arrived. And it was again at a family dinner. The same restaurant. The same table. This time with the children together, the parents, the in-laws, all present. A normal evening, in theory. But everything would change there. Jonathan noticed, as he entered, the same table next to him. And there they were. Emily and the other man. He didn't need to say anything. Her eyes found him before he even sat down. She froze. The other man, confused, tried to hide it. Jonathan simply stood up, crossed the room with calm steps, and stopped in front of the two. His hand in his pocket, his heart in pieces, his voice firm. He said, "I hope you can explain this situation well. My whole family came here for dinner and they're seeing the same scene as me," and her silence was a confession that echoed louder than any scream could. The other man looked away. Emily didn't say anything. She just lowered her head. And then Jonathan finished, with pain transformed into strength, "Okay then, I'll send the divorce letter to your house." And he left. He left behind not only the marriage, but the illusion that there was still something between them. There was no crying. There was no drama. Just the truth, naked and raw. But he still didn't know what would come next. Or that the worst was yet to be revealed. Because there was something else. Something that Emily was hiding. Something that would change everything. For weeks, Emily disappeared from Jonathan's field of vision. After dinner, she began to avoid any attempt to contact him. She didn't respond to messages or answer calls. The house was empty, silent, like a place abandoned in a hurry. Jonathan decided to move away too. He handed over the divorce proceedings to his lawyer and began living in his parents' house temporarily, trying to protect the children from a conflict that still seemed to be smoldering. Lucas and Sophia felt their mother's absence, but he didn't dare to give any explanations. Not yet. Everything was suspended, as if time refused to move forward. Jonathan didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up the night at the restaurant. What accompanied him now was an emptiness, an emotional exhaustion that corroded even his thoughts. Still, inside him, a question hammered, insatiable: why? Why did she do that? The answer would come abruptly, unexpectedly, almost cruelly. One Saturday afternoon, while he was playing with Sophia in his parents' backyard, he received a message. An unknown number. But the writing, the punctuation, the choice of words, it was Emily. The message was short: "I need to talk to you. It's important. Meet me at the place where we started." Jonathan didn't answer right away. He read and reread the text. That invitation awakened a part of him that he was trying to bury. The place where they started was a small, discreet cafe on a quiet street, where they used to spend hours in the first months of their relationship. A refuge just for them. And that was where he went, at dusk, as if obeying a calling that not even he fully understood. She was already there when he arrived, sitting at the back of the room, near the bookshelf of old books. She was different. Thinner, her hair tied up carelessly, her expression haggard. But there was something in her eyes that he had never seen before, raw truth. She looked at him and, for a few seconds, she said nothing. She just watched him. He sat down without speaking. The silence between them was thick, filled with a past that could no longer be returned. Emily broke the silence. She said that she did not expect forgiveness, that she did not want justifications, but that she needed to tell him everything. Jonathan remained silent. He stared at her, as if her words were the only thing that mattered in the world at that moment. Emily told him that it had all started a year before. Not the affair. But what had led her to him. She said that, when she was trying to recover herself, she felt an uncontrollable need to escape. But it wasn't just because of the feeling of his absence. It was because of the presence of something else. A feeling that something in her had been broken for a long time. Jonathan tried to interrupt her, but she asked him to just listen. And then she let it out. Her lover hadn't been some random stranger. He wasn't someone who had just appeared by chance. He was someone who had already been part of their lives. Someone she had known for much longer than he could have imagined. And then she said the name. And in that moment, Jonathan felt the world spin. The man Emily had cheated on him with wasn't a new coworker or a casual acquaintance from social circles. It was Daniel. Jonathan's best friend since childhood. The best man at his wedding. The man who held Lucas in his arms at the maternity ward, who attended the family's Christmas dinners, who shared beers and secrets with them, who had always been there. Jonathan stood still. A stiffness ran through his entire body. He felt his throat close up. He tried to process it, but he couldn't. Emily, her voice choked, said that she knew it was unforgivable, that she understood the impact of every syllable she said, but she couldn't live with that burden anymore. She said that Daniel had always had a kind of fascination for her. That it never went too far, until one night, after a silly fight between her and Jonathan, he showed up to talk, and the tension between them exploded. There was a kiss. Then another. And before they knew it, they were stuck in something that had grown silently, like a weed. Jonathan couldn't process it. The man he trusted, who came to his house like a brother, who played soccer with him on Sundays, who advised him in difficult times, had been the pivot of his destruction. Emily revealed that the affair hadn't lasted as long as he imagined. She said that she ended it after a few weeks, full of guilt but unable to face the truth. She continued with Jonathan as if nothing had happened. But Daniel came back. And this time, not as a lover, but as a shadow. He started showing up at places she frequented, making compliments disguised as jokes, pressuring her with messages, until she gave in again. She said she no longer knew who she was, that she had lost her sense of right and wrong, that she had let herself be carried away by something that not even she understood. Jonathan clenched his fists, his jaw clenched, his eyes dry from so much accumulated suffering. Emily apologized, but it wasn't out of fear of losing her husband. It was out of shame for herself. He said he saw himself in a mirror he never wanted to look at. He realized that everything he thought he had control over was in ruins. I was crying now, for real. And through the tears, he revealed what he hadn't said yet: Daniel was in love with her. And he had promised he would give up everything to live with her. But when Jonathan found out about the affair and asked for a divorce, Daniel disappeared. He cut off contact. He blocked messages. He disappeared. Jonathan, who had barely been able to breathe until then, let out a bitter laugh. He said he wasn't surprised. Daniel had always been jealous of him. He had always wanted everything he had. Emily didn't answer. She was broken. She said she had tried to reach out to Daniel after the divorce, believing that maybe they could rebuild their relationship, but he never responded. And then she understood. She had never been a priority. She had been just the trophy in a fight that only existed in his head. And she had lost everything. Her marriage. Her dignity. Her children's trust. And even the company of the man she had chosen to destroy everything to have. Jonathan was silent for a long time. He stood up slowly. He said he didn't feel hate. He said the love he felt for her died the moment he saw them together in that restaurant. But what hurt the most wasn't the betrayal. It was the choice. The choice to cheat on someone he had shared his entire life with. The choice to remain silent for so long. To smile while lying. To touch his children knowing what he had done. Emily tried to grab his arm. He pulled away. He said he hoped she would find peace. Because he had already decided to move on. He left the cafe without looking back. He walked through the streets in silence, without anger, without haste. For the first time in months, he felt like he had closed a cycle. But destiny still had one last piece in store. Something he didn't know yet. Something that was waiting for him where he least expected it. Jonathan walked aimlessly for almost an hour after leaving the cafe. The sun had already set and the streets had taken on the orange hue of the streetlights. The city seemed strangely indifferent to what had just happened. People hurried past, cars crossed the traffic lights, children laughed in the distance, and inside he felt as if he were watching his own life from outside a fogged-up window. His body moved, but the world around him no longer belonged to the same frequency. He picked up his cell phone, typed Daniel's name into the search engine, scrolled through old conversations, old photos, memories that now tasted like poison. For a moment, he considered calling. I wanted to hear his voice, ask if he slept peacefully at night, if he was proud of what he had done, if he had at least hesitated before betraying not only his childhood friend, but the entire history that connected them. But he deleted the number. Not because I had forgiven him, but because I no longer wanted to waste any more energy on someone who had deliberately crossed all boundaries. The next day, she woke up early and went straight to pick up her children. It was Sunday, the day to take Lucas to soccer practice and then go to the market with Sophia, who loved picking out fruit with him. She tried to keep a calm expression, even though the turmoil was still pulsing inside her chest. Lucas noticed his mother's absence, but avoided asking questions. Sophia, on the other hand, was more sensitive than expected of a 7-year-old. At one point, while holding an apple in both her small hands, she asked her father if he still loved her. Jonathan didn't know what to say. He said he would always love everything she represented, but that sometimes things change, and love isn't always enough to keep two people together. Sophia nodded with silent wisdom and put the apple in the basket. In the days that followed, Jonathan indulged in a kind of emotional seclusion. He went back to work, submitted reports, attended meetings, but it was all mechanical. At night, he went to bed sleepless, staring at the ceiling as if he could find answers there that the real world refused to provide. As much as he wanted to leave everything behind, there was something that still held him back, the feeling of having been used as a platform by people he trusted blindly. And it was that kind of wound that didn't bleed on the outside, but slowly corroded on the inside. That Friday, while he was having lunch alone in a small, quiet restaurant near his office, he was surprised by a message. This time, it was from a number he recognized immediately, Daniel's sister. The text was direct, short, but impossible to ignore. "You have to see this. It's not what it seems. Meet me today at 7 p.m. It triggered a suspicion he had been trying to ignore since the night of the revelation. Jonathan hesitated for a few minutes. He didn't want to reopen a wound that was barely beginning to heal. But at the same time, he needed to know if there were more layers to this story. He arrived at the appointed location, a small art studio that resembled a converted warehouse, with exposed brick walls and paintings leaning in the corners. Daniel's sister was there, sitting with her hands folded and her eyes filled with tears. When she saw him, she slowly stood up and handed him a manila envelope, saying simply, "He's not what you think." But that doesn't change what he did. Jonathan opened the envelope there, pulling out a set of letters, some dated almost 2 years ago. The letters were from Daniel to Emily. Confessions. Reflections. Sentences that demonstrated an obsessive and confusing love. But what caught Jonathan's attention the most were the passages where he said that he had finally gotten what he wanted, and that bringing down his friend's castle was easier than he imagined. In one of the letters, he wrote, "She just needed ears and that was me. The good listener. The comfort. The escape. The gap between them. And now that she's fallen, I don't want it anymore." Jonathan felt his entire body freeze. That confirmed something he already suspected: Daniel didn't love her. He never had. He wanted to destroy her. He wanted to prove, to himself perhaps, that he was superior. That he could take whatever he wanted. Including the love of his own best friend's life. But there was more. At the bottom of the envelope was a USB flash drive. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, then took it to the car, connected it to the multimedia system and pressed play. The recording was an audio that Daniel had sent to his sister weeks before everything came to light. In it, Daniel spoke in a slightly drunken but perfectly audible voice. He said that he never really wanted Emily, that what moved him was the pleasure of seeing Jonathan lose what he loved most. He said that he spent years watching Jonathan be the favorite, the most praised, the example, the good son, the good husband, the successful one. And that he had always hated him for it. This was not just a carnal betrayal. It was a deep-rooted revenge, cultivated over decades, disguised as friendship. Jonathan turned off the car and stood there, motionless, for long minutes. His face was expressionless, but his eyes burned like live coals. Now everything made sense. Daniel hadn't just betrayed him, he'd engineered it, manipulated it, destroyed it. And Emily, even though she was responsible for her choices, had been just a pawn in a sick game. Jonathan took a deep breath. For the first time since everything began, he felt something like clarity. He wasn't the defeated man they'd imagined he would be. He wasn't the fool. He wasn't the deceived one. He was the survivor of a war he never knew was being fought. And he was alive. That night, without planning, Jonathan decided to visit the place he hadn't been since the breakup, his old house. When he got there, he realized that Emily was there. The living room lights were on, the curtains slightly open. She was sitting on the couch, alone, holding a cup with both hands. He knocked on the door. She was startled, got up immediately, and opened the door without saying anything. The silence between them was thick, but different from the past. This time, it was necessary. Jonathan came in, looked around, and said he needed to show her something. He put the flash drive in the television. The audio began to play. Emily listened in shock. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing became shallow. When the recording ended, she began to cry silently, with her head down. She said she had no idea what he was thinking, that she believed his words, his gestures, his intentions. She said she felt used. She said she had destroyed her own family for someone who never intended to love her. Jonathan listened to her. He didn't say he understood. He didn't say he forgave her. He just said that now he knew the truth. And that with the truth, finally, I could leave. The following week, Jonathan rented a new apartment in another city. Lucas and Sophia adapted well to their new school. He started working remotely, gaining time, presence and lightness. He discovered a small and cozy cafe that he started going to every day. And it was there, between coffees and books, that he met Anna, the manager of the place. A sweet, intelligent woman, with eyes that seemed to understand more than words could say. Anna knew nothing about his past. And that was a relief. The relationship grew slowly, without the pressure of being a cure for anything. Just two strangers who learned to recognize each other over time. Emily, in turn, sold the house and moved to a small apartment. She rarely went out. He avoided contact with old friends. He avoided mirrors. He avoided his own conscience. And every night, he read the old messages he had once received from Jonathan, trying to understand when he had let love turn into ruin. Jonathan never saw Daniel again. He never wanted to see him again. Not because I hated him, but because there was nothing left to say. He had been buried along with the past he had destroyed. The pain was replaced by a serenity that was hard to achieve. Peace, in the end, came not from revenge, but from rebuilding. Because some people disappear from our lives like storms. And others come as shelter. Jonathan learned the difference. And deep down, I knew, betrayal destroys, yes. But what we do after the end is what defines us. And this time, he chose to start over. The new apartment smelled of fresh paint and bare walls, but for Jonathan, it was a new beginning. Every piece of furniture placed, every picture hung, every detail he carefully chose was a way of rewriting his story from the point where it had been torn apart. His children divided their time between weekends with him and weekdays with their mother, and as much as this arrangement hurt him in silence, he respected it. The routine now involved taking Lucas to practice at the new park, helping Sophia with her homework on a bright balcony, making simple dinners where everyone ate together and talked about their days without having to step on pieces of silence. The trauma still lived within him, but he had learned to breathe even with the rubble. And for the first time in a long time, he felt that his love for his children had expanded, not only because he saw them grow up, but because he knew he could now raise them with the truth. He didn't say anything bad about his mother. Ever. Even when Sophia asked why the changes were happening, he would simply answer with light honesty, because now everyone needs to find their own peace. That was enough. The relationship with Anna didn't start out as an explosion, but as a growing warmth that spread safely. She was simple, but extremely attentive. She knew how to listen without interrupting, she knew how to touch without invading, she knew how to exist with him without having to fill the silence with promises. Jonathan felt accepted in a way he had never experienced before. It was as if he didn't need to pretend to be okay or justify scars. She didn't demand to be his cure, and that, in itself, was liberating. Sundays began to have a different rhythm, with walks in the open air, movie afternoons with the children, conversations about books, plans without urgency. Even with the pain that accompanied him, he began to experience what it was like to rebuild something without the weight of the past weighing down every step. But there was still a shadow hovering, something unsaid, something he deliberately avoided, the real impact of the betrayal on Emily's life. While Jonathan was silently being reborn, Emily was sinking deeper and deeper into a painful process of self-confrontation. Her days were long, her nights lonely. The apartment where she lived was smaller, with few pieces of furniture, cold lighting, and a kitchen that she barely used. The walls reflected the absence of everything she had once considered love. She had distanced herself from her friends, many of whom had taken Jonathan's side. Her social circle crumbled like a sandcastle after high tide. She tried to focus on her work, on the appointments she still had with some patients, but there was something in their eyes, something that she herself recognized, the look of someone who knows that the therapist who listens to them with empathy is, deep down, the woman who lost everything in an impulse. When she wasn't in the office, she spent hours looking at old photos, rereading memories that now hurt. She no longer had contact with Daniel, and although this had initially been a source of pain, it became a relief. She finally understood that there had never been reciprocity, only manipulation. One afternoon, Emily decided to write a letter to Jonathan. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness, nor an attempt to get closer. It was a confession. She wrote for days, tearing up drafts, rewriting sentences, trying to find words that didn't sound like excuses, but like necessary truths. She talked about her doubts, about how she had felt nullified for years without him even realizing it, and about how she had allowed this to become a fertile ground for destructive decisions. She admitted her mistake bluntly, acknowledged that her fragility didn't justify what she had done, but asked him to know that, at no point, she had stopped loving him, even when she was unable to show it. She said she admired the way he had handled everything, that she saw his strength in his children's eyes, and that, although she could never repair the damage, she hoped he knew that his fall was also a mourning. The letter ended with a short but sincere sentence: "I wasn't just your wife. I was a woman in collapse. And today, I pay the price for not asking for help." Jonathan read the letter on a cold night, after putting the children to bed. He sat on the porch with a blanket over his shoulders and stared at the lights of the surrounding buildings as he absorbed each line. The words touched him. Not like before, when anything about her would dismantle him. Now, he felt something new, understanding without bonds. Empathy without attachment. He felt no anger. No desire to return. Only the certainty that, somehow, this marriage had to end so that he could truly find himself. The moral dilemma settled there, silently: to what extent are we responsible for the downfalls of others when we are emotionally absent, even without realizing it? He had not cheated. He had not lied. But had he stopped being present? Was the way he experienced love compatible with who she had become? Questions that would never have definitive answers, but that now echoed within him with maturity. In the months that followed, the changes became evident to everyone around them. Jonathan was promoted at work, not because he asked for it, but because he deserved it. His calm demeanor in the face of adversity began to be seen as leadership. The children showed clear signs of well-being, with Sophia smiling more when she visited their new home and Lucas showing interest in activities he had previously ignored. And became part of their routine. Not as a substitute, but as a constant, honest, and light presence. She never demanded anyone's place, but she occupied a space so naturally that, when Jonathan realized it, he already felt like he was building a new home. Emily, in turn, began participating in a support group for women who had gone through emotional breakdowns during long-term relationships. She shared her story among many others, and there she understood that her mistake, however serious it was part of an emotional chain that many ignore until it was too late. She was not looking for redemption, but rather to reconnect with herself. She began painting again, as she had done before getting married. Art became her outlet once again. She had one of the paintings framed and donated it to her children's school. Lucas, seeing it, said nothing, but took a photo of the painting and sent it to his father. Jonathan, watching, remained silent for a few minutes. The image was of a woman with her back turned, looking at a reddish horizon. Alone, but standing. That said it all. The last meeting between the two happened in a park, on an unexpected late afternoon. Sophia was running with other children while Lucas was kicking a ball with his friends. Emily and Jonathan sat on the same bench, without planning. They watched their children play for a few minutes in silence. She commented that Sophia was more talkative, that Lucas seemed more confident. He agreed. There was a moment when their eyes met. There was no resentment there. Just history. Emily said she was leaving the city. She wanted to start over somewhere else, close to her sister. Jonathan wished her luck. She thanked him. Before leaving, she asked if he had read the letter. He said yes. And that, despite everything, he was grateful for his sincerity. She smiled slightly. She said she hoped he would be happy. And, for the first time, Jonathan believed that maybe she really wanted that. The descending action of that story was not made up of great twists and turns, but of silences full of meaning. Of difficult decisions that, even without noise, had enough weight to shape destinies. Jonathan did not forget what he had experienced. He did not erase the scars. But he learned that the past does not have to be a prison. That moving forward does not mean forgetting, it means giving new meaning. And that, even though some falls seem definitive, there is always a chance to get up stronger. Pain turned into wisdom. Loss, into learning. And now, he was ready to live what came next. What was born from there? What, finally, would make it all worth it? Moving to the new city brought Jonathan a kind of anonymity that he didn't know how much he needed. No one there knew his story, his flaws, his pains. There were no judgmental glances or hidden whispers. Just friendly neighbors, small business owners who called him by name, and a quiet routine that adjusted to the rhythm of his days. The apartment was smaller than his old house, but cozy. The silence that had once oppressed him had now become a choice. It was in that silence that he reorganized his thoughts, his expectations, the way he saw himself and how he wanted to be seen. Anna showed up more and more, but never without warning. She respected his space, his pauses, his hesitations. Sometimes she would arrive with fresh bread from the bakery on the corner, put on some soft music on the radio, and just sit next to him, reading. Jonathan had never felt so much peace in a relationship. There was no need to prove anything. Or to fix the other person. It was like being at home, even though he was far from everything he used to call home. Over time, the children adapted to their new school. Lucas made friends and got involved in a science project that required frequent visits to the school lab, and Jonathan made a point of accompanying him, watching his son blossom in the face of new discoveries. Sophia fell in love with the art teacher and asked to paint a picture for her father. The canvas showed two dolls holding hands in front of a huge tree, and Jonathan couldn't contain his emotion when he saw his own name written in crooked letters in the bottom corner. He kept the painting as a trophy of the reconstruction. One weekend, Anna invited him to visit the neighboring town. He said he knew an open field where the stars could be seen like nowhere else. Jonathan accepted. It was night. They brought a blanket, a bottle of wine, and some fruit. They lay down on the grass, side by side, in silence. The stars shone brightly. At one point, Anna turned to him and asked if he still loved Emily. The question was not asked out of jealousy or resentment. It was done with the honesty of someone who wants to know how far they can go with someone. Jonathan took a few seconds to answer. He said no. Not anymore. That there had been love, yes, but that now all that was left was respect. Anna nodded. And, for the first time, he kissed her with the lightness of someone who no longer owed anything to the past. While Jonathan was on his new path, Emily was organizing the final details of the move. She had sold some of the furniture, donated books, packed paintings, and unpacked cabinets with her own hands. She no longer cried over everything she had lost, but she felt a kind of silent mourning that would not go away. The feeling that, no matter how much she reconnected with herself, she would never be the woman she had been before. She tried to turn this into something useful. She continued to attend the support group, now with more involvement. She began to share her journey in more depth, and it was there, amidst intertwined stories of mistakes and new beginnings, that she found a new purpose. One night, after one of the meetings, a younger woman approached her and said that she had decided not to repeat the same pattern of emotional abandonment in her marriage after hearing Emily speak. At that moment, she understood that, even without wanting to, even after everything, she could still bring about transformation. She decided to take a specialization course in crisis therapy. She wanted to prepare herself better, not only to help others, but to understand the complexities that she herself did not see in time. Days after the farewell in the park, Jonathan received an unexpected call. She was his ex-mother-in-law. The voice on the other end of the line was full of hesitation. She asked if he would be available to talk in person. Jonathan was silent for a few moments, but accepted. They met in an old café, far from the center, a neutral place. She arrived with measured steps, a look somewhere between pain and hope. After a few minutes of light conversation, she got straight to the point. He said he knew how much his daughter had done wrong. He said he didn't defend her, but that as a mother, he couldn't watch her wither away. She asked if there was anything he could say to Emily before she left. Jonathan took a deep breath, looked down at the bottom of his coffee cup, and said no. That everything he had to say had already been said. But before she left, she asked him to tell her daughter that she was not the same woman who had betrayed her, but that it was up to her to decide what to do with it. The ex-mother-in-law nodded silently, wiped away a tear that was running down the corner of her eye, and said goodbye with a hug that carried more gratitude than a request. Over time, Jonathan realized that talking about betrayal was becoming less and less necessary. The wounds had healed, even if the scars were still there. It was like new skin that forms after a deep burn, more sensitive, more alert, but also stronger. Anna became part of the simple moments, the improvised dinners, the children's birthdays, the spontaneous photos. One rainy night, while they were washing the dishes together, Anna paused, looked at him and told him that she loved him. Jonathan turned, held her face in his hands and replied that he loved her too. He said it without fear, without doubt. It was a different kind of love. A calm love. Love after pain. Meanwhile, Emily was preparing the last box for the move. It was the box of memories. Childhood photos of the children, old notes, a ring that no longer fit, and an envelope with the last letter she had written to Jonathan but never sent. There was no need. He already knew everything. As she closed the box, she looked around for the last time. The now empty apartment seemed to echo her footsteps. She walked out the door without looking back. Her new destination was a smaller, quieter city, where she would live near her sister and where she could start over with the luggage she now knew how to carry more consciously. On the way, she sent a short message to Jonathan, "I'm going. Thank you for everything. I hope your life is easy." He read the message and simply replied, "May yours be too." In the weeks that followed, Jonathan was asked to give a talk about emotional resilience at an event hosted by the company. He was hesitant to accept, but Anna encouraged him. She said his story could be useful to others, and he realized that perhaps sharing his experience could somehow be more than cathartic, it could be inspiring. During his presentation, he spoke about rebuilding, about losses that are not visible, about choices that hurt, and about the power of reinvention. He didn't mention names. He didn't give details. But every word came from a place of truth. At the end, he received a standing ovation. A man approached and said he had decided not to leave his house that night, but he was glad he had come. He said he now knew what he needed to do, forgive himself before demanding forgiveness from others. Jonathan smiled. And in that smile, there was peace. The decreasing action manifested itself in small details. In the way he hugged his children with more intention. In the way he smiled at Anna without rushing. In the way he responded to messages with more empathy. There was no rush to rebuild everything. There was no longer that eagerness to prove something to the world. Now it was about living with awareness, with truth, with lightness. The past could not be erased, but it no longer determined the future. Emily went on her way. She found a new job, a new therapist, new books. She wrote letters to herself as a way of remembering who she was before she lost herself. And on the nights when the silence still weighed heavily, she wrote without an addressee, as a way of giving back to the world a little of the pain she had learned to carry with dignity. Jonathan, finally, was no longer the betrayed man. He was the man who chose to stand up, who chose not to hold grudges, who learned to love again. And as life went on, The winds now blew gently, as if they respected those who had faced too many storms. Everything was moving towards something new, something that was born from the unexpected. And what would come next would still be capable of surprising even those who thought they had seen it all. It was spring when Jonathan decided to do something he never imagined he would do again, write. Not to post, not for others, but for himself. He took a new notebook, with a simple cover, opened it to the first page and wrote the date. He started with loose, almost shy sentences, but soon realized that the writing flowed as if it had been kept inside him for years, waiting for the right moment to be born. He wrote about losses that cannot be seen with the naked eye, about the silence that hurts more than words, about how difficult it is to get back up when the ground has been ripped out from under your feet by someone who loved you unconditionally. Each page filled was a new step towards the freedom he didn't know he still needed to conquer. There was no anger in the words, only truth. And the truth, finally, hurt less than the silence that preceded it. Lucas was graduating from elementary school at the time and made sure to personally deliver the invitation to the ceremony to his father. Jonathan felt a pride that hurt in his chest. The boy, who had seen his father fall apart, was now a reflection of the strength with which he had risen. Sophia, more sensitive, insisted on sleeping with a flashlight on, even though she was already too old for it. When Jonathan asked why, she replied that when the world goes dark, the light has to come from somewhere. And he understood that the flashlight was not fear, but memory. Emily was not at the graduation. By her own decision. She called her son a few days before and said that she thought it would be better to respect that moment without interfering. Lucas, too mature for his age, simply replied that he understood her. But her absence that day was felt. Jonathan did not comment. He knew that each choice she made was now part of a penance that no one else needed to apply. Over time, Anna became increasingly intertwined with the routine of the new family. But she never took anyone's place. She never imposed herself. Her presence was subtle and profound. She and Jonathan adopted the habit of walking at dusk, and it was on one of these walks that he stopped, took her hand and said he wanted to start everything with her, from scratch, without a shadow of pain, without emotional inheritances. Anna smiled and said that they had already started, that he was the only one who hadn't realized it yet. And there, under the red sky, he knew he was ready. He proposed months later, at a simple dinner, surrounded only by the children. Lucas held back a shy laugh, Sophia screamed with joy. Anna cried. And said yes. The wedding took place in a flowery garden, with few guests, a small band playing old songs, and an atmosphere of peace that none of those present could accurately describe. It wasn't just a union. It was a rebirth. Emily, in her new life, found a kind of peace that only those who have hit rock bottom know. She began working as a facilitator in workshops on emotional reconstruction. She spoke to groups of women who, like her, had let control of their lives slip through their fingers. She never played the victim. She told her story with harshness, but also with empathy. She did not seek public redemption, but rather the understanding that her scars had become tools. One day, after one of these workshops, she was approached by a young woman holding a notebook with notes. She said that she was about to repeat Emily's mistakes, but that after listening to her, she decided to talk to her husband instead of seeking relief outside. Emily hugged the young woman tightly. There, in that gesture, she felt that, although she had lost everything she considered essential, she could still do something that no one could take away from her, transform pain into learning. One morning, Emily received a request. It was a simple envelope. Inside was a copy of the book Jonathan had written and had printed in a small print run for friends and family only. The inscription read only one sentence: "May the truth one day free you from everything that silence could not." She held the book as if it carried the weight of everything she had never been able to say. She read each page calmly. There were no accusations there. There was history. There was humanity. And in the end, she understood that it was never just about what she had done, but about what they had both allowed to become invisible. She cried. But it was a clean cry, of acceptance, of closure. She put the book on the shelf and decided that from that moment on, she would stop writing letters to herself. The story was complete. Years later, Emily was surprised by an unexpected phone call. It was Lucas. A teenager, already with a man's voice. He said he would like to visit her. Alone. She prepared the apartment as if she were receiving a king. When he arrived, the two hugged for long minutes. They talked about everything, except the past. Lucas said he understood. He didn't justify it, but he understood. He said he grew up watching his father overcome pain, and that this taught him more than any school lesson. Emily listened to everything in silence, her eyes filled with tears. At the end of the conversation, before leaving, Lucas said, "You made a mistake. But you also learned. And I decided not to let your mistake define who I am." Emily closed the door behind her with a deep sense of relief in her chest. Finally, she was free. Jonathan, now married to Anna, a present father, a whole man, decided to open a small space of emotional support for men who had been through abusive relationships, betrayals, or rebuilding their lives. There he received similar stories, some harder, others easier. But in each one he saw reflections of what he had experienced. And, with each session, he felt that something inside him was healed a little more. The pain stopped being a prison and became a road. Life continued with challenges, of course, but now there was solid ground, there was truth. And, above all, there was love. Not the idealized love that destroyed him, but the real love that saved him. This was the story of a man who saw everything crumble before his very eyes, but decided not to become the rubble of what brought him down. A story of choices, of falls, of new beginnings. And, above all, a story about how betrayal, as devastating as it may be, does not have to be the end, but can, in fact, be the beginning of a much truer life. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Which part impacted you the most? Leave your comment below, your opinion is very important. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, take advantage now to subscribe and not miss any of the upcoming stories that will touch your heart. And never forget, betrayal destroys homes, bonds, identities. It erodes the foundation of trust and erases dreams that were built together. No moment of pleasure justifies the pain it leaves. Here on this channel, we are against any kind of betrayal. Our stories are fictional, but the feelings they awaken are real. May each story serve as a mirror and a warning. And, above all, may we learn to value those who walk with us. Because those who love, care. And those who care, never betray.